Okay, everybody, welcome. We're going to get started today. We have a guest speaker with us today. His name is Dan, and he's coming to us because of his experience as a software developer. And the conversation begins here with his blog post. So it's a nice title that would probably interest most of us if we're developers. It says the pros and cons of being a software engineer at a big tech company. And so we're going to hear some of the contents that are listed here. And I appreciate, Dan, that you wrote this as a insider view and your experiences. So you become the expert on this one topic for sure, is what it's like to work in a tech company versus maybe a non-tech company. And so those are the issues that we're facing here. And so what I'd like to do first is to start off with a question as, why don't you tell us about what you see in your experience as your main point of your blog post, working at Facebook for a little time and then moving to another company, and what you learned from that experience. So give us the quick summary of what you wrote.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that, Professor Slider. And so I'll start with kind of my experience at Facebook. I interned there, summer of 2017. And the first thing that became very apparent, even in my first day, was that, even as an intern stepping onto campus, you're treated like a full-time employee. When you're coming to intern at a Facebook or even friends that have, and I've learned this from friends that have interned at kind of the other FANG companies, you're not there to mess around. You're not there just to take on the perks and kind of, have a fun summer. You're there to actually contribute to the engineering culture and the company as a whole. And so from the get-go, getting to meet with my manager and kind of setting a roadmap for that summer of, what is it that I wanted to accomplish and what kind of value that I want to add to the company itself or kind of within my specific org. So there are probably a few takeaways there. One, I think the urgency and seriousness that Facebook placed on, the value that interns could add and should add. And two, I think just the general prioritization of engineering and having engineers be the kind of focal point of the company, obviously with Facebook being a software driven company. Now I'll kind of stop there and juxtapose that with my experience at really the last three companies that I've been a part of. So subsequently after Facebook, I worked at DPR Construction, which the relationship there was that DPR built Facebook's data center. So there was a very direct working relationship there. Following that last internship, I also worked at Interscope Records, which is a record label that specializes in hip hop, pop, and then R&B as well. And that was based in Santa Monica. And then currently at Centerfield Media. So the two companies that I mentioned with DPR Construction and Interscope Records kind of had a similar vibe in terms of very corporate, very focused on kind of non-engineering efforts. And as Professor Slider and I have discussed, that particularly those type of companies look at engineering departments as a cost center. It's a necessary cost, and it's not something that necessarily contributes to kind of the mission critical nature of those companies. And finally,
let me stop you there and just ask a real direct question then. So everybody in this room and everyone that's watching you is concerned that their first job is going to be a good experience. Mm-hmm. And so we're wondering, is the shoot for the moon Facebook really the best option, or in the bottom line of things, is working at a company that does construction or records going to still cut it? Are we going to be happy there?
And that's a great question. I don't presuppose to have kind of the all-knowing answer there. I can speak from my experience and kind of pull from kind of mainstream tech culture and whatnot. The first thing that I would add, the first thing that I would say about FANG companies is that they're well known for a reason. They're successful from a revenue standpoint. All the perks that you hear and read about are great, kind of everything from the free food to the free equipment to just getting to learn a lot. That said, I think there's a lot of sentiment within the tech community of the saying goes of, you go to a Google to retire. And so kind of stopping there, I'll move to, if you work at a construction company like I did, or a record label, um, the beauty or benefit of being at those type of companies, even though engineering may not be kind of the priority, is subject matter and domain, right? So if you're genuinely interested in, let's say, music, and in my case, it was music, and really wanted to be a part of music production and how artists pushed out different projects and whatnot, that will serve you well kind of in the short term and keep you engaged in your work and help you produce a lot of value for that company. And I think the second answer there is getting to work on interesting problems. I wouldn't say that you're unable to work on interesting things out of Facebook or Google or any of the FAANG companies, but because of how corporate those companies are, you're kind of given a platter of issues to solve, and you kind of work from there. Whereas, if you're a talented engineer and you pick a company and you find their domain and subject matter interesting, you're going to be much more engaged during your tenure there.
Okay. So give us an example of a project that you worked on at Facebook. Did you work on anything that related to the interface? Was it the back end? And then contrast that to what you did for your record company and your construction company.
Yeah, definitely. So I got to work on an internal tool at Facebook that essentially helped our internal stakeholders understand so within the data center context, there are two metrics that are primarily important. One, how much megawatt output a given data center is going to give out. So how much energy is it consuming to then kind of maintain its output? And two, cost. Like from a revenue standpoint, how much is a data center going to cost? And we're talking, millions, tens of millions of dollars kind of per build. And so in the nature of like working in data center infrastructure, got to work on an internal tool that essentially laid out and forecasted megawatt outage or output and revenue over the course of the next 7 or 8 quarters. So getting to work with engineering stakeholders to automate that tool and be able to have and be able to debug it kind of on a regular basis.
So did anything that you researched or studied, did that result in any decisions that Facebook made? Did they change their mind or change any behaviors?
It did. One of my kind of claims to fame is within the data center org. Mark Zuckerberg actually came through for a brief moment in presenting the final project, and getting to inform kind of his team and then the direct reports, who technically were the VP of my department. They had initially looked at building data centers on I think it was like a semi-annual cadence, but based on the dashboard and the internal tool that I had built and helped pioneer, that tool showed that we had a lot more capacity to build kind of on a quarterly basis rather than just twice a year. So did that necessarily push the needle for Facebook? I think in many ways it did. It didn't affect the interface or kind of UI by any means, but that was exciting to see kind of that decision process made kind of as a result.
All right. So then tell us about the construction company job and what kind of an impact you had on that company and why they needed you or maybe didn't want you. That's kind of what you wrote about. It was
right. Yeah, absolutely. So with the construction internship, one of the things I was really interested in if you want to refer to it as like a post-project high from Facebook, is this world of how do you kind of forecast financial needs and especially kind of resource needs from a construction standpoint. And so doing something very similar with the in-house engineering team there was probably a couple of data scientists and a couple of developers that I worked with to push out that tool. And so, sort of as a continuation of what I was most interested in at the time, getting to work with a very small team to push out another kind of similar tool by the end of that summer internship. But I think the big point of realization for me was that in the meeting with that final presentation with the upper management within that construction company, the reaction was very different. And so those stakeholders kind of looked at the internal tool, they kind of scratched their heads and they said, what are we exactly doing here? And so I was still able to add value because I pushed the tool to kind of more managers that were more on the field with building out the actual buildings, But at a high level, the VPs and kind of the C-suite executives were somewhat disinterested and kind of they weren't very plugged into the day-to-day operations there.
Okay, and so that kind of brings us to our main point of the conversation is that did you feel like you were disconnected from the main mission of the company and that they could take you or leave you? Was that kind of your feeling, and that you would be disappointed if you worked there long term?
Yeah, absolutely. I think by nature, when you think of a construction company, you don't really think of engineers being at the forefront of kind of an important aspect to that company's success. You think of the people, the actual contractors that are building the buildings, the people that they call, they're essentially project managers that meet with clients and help forecast needs and whatnot. And so by the end of the internship, I was still interested in kind of the construction side of it within kind of the data realm. But I think the culture was a huge deterrent with wanting to stay on there. And my engineering manager actually sat me down for a final performance review, and he said, "We're going to give you an offer, but I strongly recommend that you don't take it." And so that was a pretty eye-opening experience to be able to have that candid conversation, because I think he understood.
So why was that? Why didn't he recommend it? What was the matter?
So his big point was, you're going to be compensated well. You'll always have a place here to some degree with, at least being one of the few engineering employees within the company. But his main point was that the culture of adopting new tools was barely there. It was budding, but it wasn't something that people were ready to step into. Namely, you had a lot of folks that were very old school in their mentality, and so they were okay with even writing forecasted revenues down, and just like, even living in Excel, which is still technology, but I find it kind of archaic.
Sure. Okay, so let me give you a hypothetical situation. So one of our students here in front of me is going to get some interviews. Here in Phoenix, Arizona, we've got companies that are somewhat big and possible. So like American Express has a big presence here. Their product is, credit cards and insurance. We have U-Haul. Who would ever thought they'd need programmers, but they hire programmers. Of course, their job is to rent out equipment. Then we have Carvana, who is a technology company that sells used cars, but it's online. It's kind of like an Amazon marketplace for used cars. So you can see that in technology is kind of like a high, medium, and a low in those three examples. So if a student gets a good job from, let's say, an insurance company versus a tech-enabled company, and they're similar pay, you would definitely probably say, don't go for the U-Haul. They're probably interested in how many cars they rent rather than somebody who's interested in engineering new tools. Is that what your advice would be?
I think generally speaking, if you were to give me an offer from a FANG company and they were paying the same, I think one, being around more engineers that can help you improve as an engineer yourself is the first benefit that comes to mind. Now, the objection that I would have is, and this is what I found at the record label when I worked there, and I'll kind of start with that example and then circle back around. When I worked at the record label, there were definitely talented engineers there that could work at any of the FANG companies that had gone to the top tier schools and had gotten offers. And I had a candid question. I was like, why would you want to work here when you could work at a more reputable company? And they told me, like, I just really love music. And I didn't really get it back then, but I think in retrospect, I understand when you're passionate about domain, you'll take an equal, in this hypothetical case, an equal amount of pay, but in a lot of cases, you're taking less pay to work for a less reputable company. But if you're engaged in the domain, that's kind of the nature of like working full time. But kind of circling back, in that case, I think, if the domain's interesting to you and you feel like genuinely and authentically engaged in it, it's hard to turn down kind of work satisfaction. But if you have the chance to work for FANG, I would at least try it out.
Okay, so speaking of working for FANG, which is what, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netscape, Google, Netflix, sorry. And so when I hear those words, I hear California written all over all of them, West Coast.
Yeah.
And there's a few of us that live there. I mean, they come here to Grand Canyon University
Mhm.
from California. But a lot of us think of expensive houses when we think of Silicon Valley, Seattle, Los Angeles. Is it worth it for us to take the hit and pay the cost of living to work at a top tier company?
Mhm.
Or can we just work for 5 miles away at PetSmart or U-Haul or American
Right.
Express?
Right. Again, great loaded question. I don't know if I have kind of the all-knowing answer I can
Yeah,
provide
but
context myself.
you're sitting in LA right now, right?
Correct. Yeah,
And
correct.
you're paying for the house that you're in. So
I am.
you've made that choice. So tell
Right,
us
right.
if that's a good choice, if you feel good with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think personally for me, I I would say it's a good choice. Now, I would be the first one to admit that I don't feel like I'm taking full advantage of kind of the location itself. Um, I'm personally interested in the intersection of kind of this movement with tech and entertainment. That intersection is really interesting to me, and I think LA is one of the few places, at least within America, that kind of embodies all three of those as tenants. And so that would be my first kind of criteria: is are you moving to a Silicon Valley or an LA or Seattle just to move there and think that you're getting more pay and whatnot, or are you actually moving to that geographical location to take full advantage of the network? And so that's kind of the broad criteria. As a caveat, we see that with remote the a lot of the workforce going remote, those benefits are kind of lessened, right? And I think we're seeing more money siphoning out of the Silicon Valleys of the world to where venture capital funding is. You can find that in Nashville now. Austin is a huge spot. So these once juggernauts of VC funding and innovation, there are other places that are comparable. And so if you really love like sunny weather and really want to be in LA, great. I would encourage you to kind of dig deeper into your reasoning, and you can always find salaries elsewhere. You can always find innovation elsewhere. So if it's not those things, like what is it? And for me, LA is kind of that demographic of people who want to do good, that are tech oriented and want to affect people at scale, kind of within entertainment. And that's why I'm here.
Okay. So here's another toughie is how did you get so fortunate to land an internship at Facebook? Were you on a special track or did they just like your resume really well?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a combination of two things in my mind. So one, I had a little bit of time to prepare and understand what is it exactly that I wanted to do. I have like a short blurb on LinkedIn, but I volunteered with Youth with a Mission for about 3 years prior to stepping into undergrad. And for those who are unaware of that organization, it's essentially just a missions organization. So I had 3 years to really think about what I wanted, and that time off really contributed to me getting to identify what exactly I wanted to do. And that was specifically to work at the intersection of kind of business and data. And so kind of from a resume standpoint, like once I identified that intersection, I was able to start picking up skills over those 3 years that gave me the best chance to then put it on my resume and obviously land the internship. Now, I would say equally as important as resume and skills is your ability to network and talk to people. And so, coming in, I wasn't married to data infrastructure, necessarily data centers, but I knew that I wanted to intern at a FANG company. And so getting to work through my own network, meeting friends of friends and just grabbing casual coffee chats, I eventually worked my way into kind of meeting a couple of the managers and eventually the VP within the infrastructure data center org, and kind of the rest is history from there.
That was a good opportunity. So what's next for you? Where are you going next?
That's also a great question. So I think for me, really sitting in this current role, I consider it a great privilege to work for essentially just an established startup that is no longer a like fresh, needing to prove itself, but it's profitable. There's a lot of revenue. I'm getting to grow in my role, getting to grow the small team that I'm a part of. But I think also tech aside, and this is maybe, yeah, this may come of interest, but I think focusing on the work that I'm doing, but also taking a step back and considering, what exactly is it that I want to see happen? As a quick aside, I think tech is great. There's a lot of great things happening within the industry, but something that I've become a lot more aware of is how the types of problems being solved, and meaning we're as a whole, as an industry, we're solving problems that kind of the top 1% is interested in, right? Like travel planning, drink delivery, cannabis delivery. Like, who are the people that actually need to be helped? And so something that I'm really passionate about is helping underrepresented groups learn how to code and subsequently break into tech. And so really hoping to build out that platform, kind of out on a content perspective, but also with TikTok, and just jumping on YouTube, trying to be like your professor. So yeah, I think there's a lot of avenues to help underrepresented groups, particularly to break into tech and to help kind of, I guess, spread the opportunities around.
So tell us what you've done with TikTok and YouTube. Have you published a lot of things?
So with YouTube, I just started last week. I posted an About Me page, but I started posting on TikTok, I think back in October. Have grown the following to just over 3,000 followers, and have had a lot of fun kind of producing the short form content, and getting to know kind of some of the trends. I feel a little bit old because I'm like, I very much identify as a millennial, but TikTok being so Gen Z, my 18-year-old sister makes fun of me for it all the time, calls my content cringy. But yeah, really hoping to grow that TikTok platform and just continue to push out content once a day. And then on the other side, kind of firing on the written content. So writing for Stack Overflow, Free Code Camp, Code Academy, and just establishing myself as a voice within the coding.
So on TikTok, is it about coding and technology, or are you dancing?
Oh man, I don't even want to see my own dance moves. I would say 90% of it is coding and tech related. I'll get like a funny video idea completely unrelated to tech once in a while, and I'll post that like maybe once every couple of weeks. But yeah, mostly teaching people how to code, like establishing a great learning path, and providing tips and short form videos that help provide insight with, how do you land that interview, and how do you ace the interview to then land a job.
Okay, so we're coming to the end here of the conversation, but if somebody wants to post in the comments or the chat here, we'll pick those up. So then here, I got a sense here that what we're doing in class is not the full picture, because in class we are concerned about code, syntax, functions, software design, databases, numbers. But what you've been talking about is a picture of solving a business problem and talking to a bigger thing where technology isn't necessarily the whole picture, it's just the solution. Is that an accurate way to describe your career outlook now?
I think so. Yeah, that would be accurate. I love tech because it's innovative and you can help people at scale. I think it's a great vehicle. I would also acknowledge that there are other things happening in the world that are just as important too.
Very good. All right, so tell us how we can see your channels. What's your links on TikTok and YouTube?
I can throw them up on the comment section here. So TikTok is just Dan SJ, CHAE. And then let's see, IG. I mean, I don't really do a whole ton on IG, but you can follow it if you want. Those are kind of the main platforms there. So yeah, and I'll kind of throw my website in there as well, coursetohire.com. So those are kind of my socials, and really just trying to grow those over the next several months and see where they can go. But eventually wanting to move towards product development within Course to Hire. So I don't know if it's necessarily pumping out a course. I could probably chat to you, Professor Slider, later about what that looks like. But yeah, pumping out something that would be empathetic and relevant to the learning process, and aspiring programmers there.
Very good. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And those are good insights for us. We're all thinking about graduation and worried about getting hired for that first job. And so you've given us some things to think about.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, send a connect, and would be happy to chat with any of you guys. And yeah, best of luck. Best wishes with kind of your careers and landing that first job out of college.